My name is Miranda Cole. I'm 37 years old, and until last December, I believed that family was everything, even when it cost me everything. I paid the mortgage on a house I didn't own. I kept the lights on for people who forgot to save me a seat at the table. I sent gifts that arrived with my money but someone else's name. And when I finally discovered what they said about me when they thought I'd never hear it, the word they used was convenient. Not daughter, not sister, not family. Convenient. That single word changed everything. Because when you realize you've been treated as a utility instead of a human being, you start to wonder, what happens when the utility shuts off? They found out on Christmas Eve, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a Tuesday morning in early December when the silence first became loud enough to hear. The frost had settled on my window overnight, a thin blur that made the world outside look like a watercolor painting left in the rain. I woke at 6:15, 15 minutes before my alarm, as always. I've never been able to sleep past the point of usefulness. Some people snooze, I prepare. It's been that way as long as I can remember. My apartment in Durham isn't large, but it's mine. A one-bedroom with hardwood floors that creak in the cold. A kitchen barely big enough for one person to cook without bumping elbows with the refrigerator, and windows that face east, catching the first week light of winter mornings. I moved here 5 years ago when I got the job at the consulting firm downtown. The commute is short, the neighbors are quiet. The silence, most days, feels like a friend. That Tuesday, it felt like a warning. I made coffee the way I always do, strong, black, poured into the same ceramic mug I've used since college. The ritual steadied me as I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, waiting for something I already knew, deep down, wasn't coming. Every year, by the first week of December, my inbox would fill with a thread of emails about Christmas. Who was bringing the ham? Who was in charge of pies? What time we'd all meet at my mother's house in Charlotte. The messages came from my cousin Katie, usually in all caps and decorated with too many exclamation points. From my sister Tori, with her passive-aggressive reminders about labeling serving spoons. From various aunts and uncles chiming in with dietary restrictions and arrival times. This year, there was nothing. I refreshed the page once, twice, a third time, more out of habit than hope. The inbox stayed empty. I told myself maybe they hadn't started planning yet. Maybe someone was waiting on travel confirmations. Maybe the thread had been created and I'd missed it somehow, lost in my spam folder or filtered into some digital limbo. But I knew better. Silence that clean, that precise, is never accidental. I tried the family Google Drive next, the shared folder we'd used for years. Each December, it held spreadsheets with assignment lists, playlists of Christmas music curated by various family members, gift exchange names drawn at random. I clicked the bookmarked link and waited. A red message appeared across my screen. Access denied. I stared at it, then tried another link. An older bookmark from the previous year. Same result. Access denied. It was like a door that used to swing open freely, now locked from the inside with me standing on the wrong side. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. I picked it up, expecting spam or a work notification, but the name on the screen made my chest tighten. Mom. The message was short. Don't worry, I figured you'd be busy this year. No need to stress about Christmas. I read it 3 times, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something warmer. They didn't. There was no, we miss you. No, hope you can make it. Just a sentence that sounded more like a dismissal than care. The kind of message that doesn't ask for a reply. I set the phone face down on the table and leaned back in my chair. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The coffee had gone cold without me noticing. Outside, I could hear the muffled sounds of neighbors starting their days, car doors closing, an engine turning over, a child's voice calling out something I couldn't quite catch. I wasn't crying. I'd stopped crying over things this predictable years ago, but there was a heaviness in my chest, a pressure I couldn't quite swallow. Familiar, yet heavier this time, like a door closing with a finality I couldn't ignore. I thought about last Christmas. I'd arrived at the house in Charlotte later than planned, stuck in traffic after a client meeting ran long. My arms were full of wrapped gifts, each one chosen carefully. each one carrying a memory of something a family member had mentioned wanting throughout the year. In my other hand, I balanced a tray of cookies I'd baked at 2 in the morning because I knew no one else would think to bring them. When I stepped into the kitchen, not a single person looked up. The dining table was already full. Every chair taken. Food being passed, wine being poured, laughter rising like steam from the dishes. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, waiting for someone to notice me, to wave me over, to pull up a chair from somewhere. My sister Tori glanced in my direction and smirked. "Look who finally decided to show up." I never caught who muttered the follow-up, something about always having to wait for me, because laughter swallowed the words. What mattered was that no one moved. No one made room. I ended up eating at the kitchen counter, balancing a paper plate while my relatives toasted each other in the next room. I told myself then that it was a mistake. Just stress. Just holiday chaos. Families forget things, right? They forget you don't eat pork, forget you always bring the deviled eggs no one admits to liking, but everyone finishes. I let it go. But now, sitting in my apartment with that text message burning in my mind, it didn't feel like an accident anymore. It felt orchestrated, like a meeting had been held and my name had been struck from the list. I poured the cold coffee into the sink and watched the brown swirl vanish down the drain. Outside, neighbors were stringing up lights across their porches, the sound of children shouting as they ran between yards carrying tangled cords. Inside, the air was heavy with something I couldn't name. I closed the laptop, not because there was nothing more to look for, but because I already knew what I wouldn't find. That morning settled into me the way frost settles on glass, thin and invisible until you breathe and realize you can no longer see through. The phone rang just after 9 that evening. I was brushing my teeth, going through the motions of a normal night, even though nothing about the day had felt normal. The vibration rattled against the wooden nightstand, loud in the quiet apartment. I glanced at the screen and saw the word Mom in capital letters, the same way I'd saved her number years ago when I first got my own phone and still believed that emphasis meant importance. I let it ring. The call went to voicemail. I stood there with the toothbrush still in my mouth, foam dripping, watching the notification appear. New voicemail. I rinsed, spat, wiped my face with a towel, and sat on the edge of the bed. Then I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, flat, rehearsed, stripped of any warmth. "We all agreed. You're not welcome at Christmas." No hesitation, no sadness, no attempt to soften the blow. It sounded less like a mother delivering difficult news and more like a boardroom decision being read aloud. A verdict without appeal. I sat very still, my thumb hovering over the screen. The message replayed once on its own, an automatic loop that drove each word deeper. We all agreed. The collective pronoun. The finality. By the second replay, I was saving it. My fingers were steady even as my stomach knotted. I knew I'd need that recording later. Proof that what I heard wasn't just in my head. I placed the phone on the comforter beside me and stared at the ceiling. The words echoed in my chest, heavier with each repetition. Not, "I feel it might be easier." Not, "It hurts to say this." Just the cold verdict of a group that had voted me out. It felt like being expelled from my own bloodline. The next morning I woke early, restless from dreams that left me with clenched fists and a pounding headache. I reached for my phone the moment I sat up. The group chat, the one that had existed for years, labeled holiday hysteria with Tori's excessive use of holiday emojis, was gone. Not archived, not muted, gone. I scrolled through my other conversations, searching for remnants, for some trace of the thread, but it was as if I'd been lifted clean out of their digital lives. Out of habit, I opened Facebook, though I rarely used it anymore. The first post on my feed stopped me cold. It was a photo of Katie, my cousin, holding a wine glass at my mother's dining table. Around her were familiar faces, 12 people in total. My mother's hand rested on Katie's shoulder in a gesture that looked almost ceremonial. The caption read, "Doing what's best for the whole family isn't always easy, but it's worth it." I zoomed in on the picture until the pixels blurred, the same chandelier I'd helped my mother pick out 3 years ago, the same dining chairs I'd ordered online and driven down from Raleigh to deliver. Now they were filled with people who had voted me out. There was no empty seat waiting for me, no place card with my name. I scrolled down and found the comments. Nathan, my younger cousin. Hard vote, but necessary. Tori, with a row of clapping hand emojis. Katie, family first. Always. I closed the app quickly, but the words had already lodged themselves in my chest like stones. The apartment fell quiet again. The hum of the heater clicked on, the only sound except for my own breathing. I set the phone on the table and pressed both palms against my eyes until the darkness behind them sparked with phantom lights. They had used the word family while casting me out of it. And the worst part, the part that settled into my bones like winter cold, was that none of this was new. The exclusion had been building for years. I'd just been too desperate to believe it to see clearly. I picked up the phone again and looked at my mother's text from the day before. Don't worry. I figured you'd be busy this year. Now those words read differently. Not an assumption of my schedule, but permission she was giving herself. A preemptive excuse for what they'd already decided. I didn't reply. I didn't send a question to Tori demanding an explanation. I just let the screen go dark and the room stay silent, because deep down I already knew this was only the beginning. And somewhere in the records I'd kept all these years, the spreadsheets, the receipts, the bank statements, was proof of everything they'd taken from me while pretending I didn't exist. 2 days passed before I could bring myself to look. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, but this time I wasn't checking email. I opened the spreadsheet I'd maintained for years, a habit from my job, applied to my personal life. Rows of numbers stretched down the screen, neat and predictable, each one a quiet reminder of what I'd carried month after month. The mortgage tab came first. I clicked on it and scrolled to the beginning. January 2020, the first payment, $1,420. I traced the column with my finger as if I could feel the weight of it through the glass screen. 48 months of payments. 4 years of steady withdrawals from my account on the first of every month, regular as a heartbeat. I did the math in my head, though I already knew the number, nearly $70,000. Just in mortgage payments, not counting the property tax escrow, the homeowner's insurance, the maintenance costs my mother would forget to mention until they became emergencies. That house had consumed more of my income than anything else I'd ever paid for. Vacations I'd skipped. Clothes I never bought. Dinners I turned down because the money needed to go somewhere else. All so the payment could slide quietly out of my account on the first of each month, keeping a roof over my mother's head in Charlotte while I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Durham. I remembered the conversation in her kitchen 4 years ago. She'd asked me to co-sign the loan when she refinanced, her voice casual, her hand waving away any concerns like they were flies at a summer picnic. Just until the bank feels comfortable, Randa, she'd said, using the childhood nickname that always made me feel small. We'll switch it over once things are stable. You know how these banks are. I'd believed her, because back then, I still believed her promises meant something. I opened the folder where I kept scanned copies of important documents, the ones I never fully trusted to the cloud. The mortgage paperwork loaded slowly, black text stark against the white background. At the top, Eleanor Cole, listed as sole owner. Below that, in smaller type, Miranda Cole, co-borrower. I stared at the words until they blurred. Not co-owner. Not joint owner. Co-borrower. The person who made the loan possible but held no claim to the property itself. I had been paying for a house that, legally, I had no right to. If my mother sold it tomorrow, I would receive nothing. If she died, it would pass to whoever she named in her will, which, I suddenly realized, probably wasn't me. I pushed the chair back and stood, pacing the length of the apartment. The walls felt too close, the air too thick. I pulled up the document on my phone just to see if the words looked different on a smaller screen. They didn't. Owner, Eleanor Cole. Co-borrower, Miranda Cole. I flipped back to the spreadsheet and opened the Utilities tab. Gas, electric, internet. $281 this month, $340 the month before, fluctuating with the seasons. Every confirmation email still saved in my inbox. I'd set them all to autopay years ago, telling myself it was easier to manage, easier to keep things steady for her, easier not to think about whether anyone noticed. I thought about the nights my mother hosted birthday dinners in that house. The lights glowing, the oven running, the laughter spilling out into the yard. All of it powered by accounts with my name at the top. No one ever asked if the bills were heavy. No one ever offered to split them. It was just assumed. Miranda will handle it. The numbers had always been neat, but now they felt like chains, each dollar tied to a memory I wasn't even allowed to sit at the table for. Later that evening, I opened my email and searched for old order confirmations. One by one, I found them, the Christmas gifts I'd sent over the years. 3 years ago, I'd stood in the lobby of a shipping store in Durham, balancing a stack of carefully wrapped boxes against my hip. Each one labeled in my neat handwriting, each one taped shut with care. I'd worked late shifts that week just to cover the expedited shipping. Inside those boxes were gifts I'd chosen over months. A silver bracelet Tori had admired offhand in May. A scarf in the exact shade of blue my mother used to wear in her old photos. Ornaments for the tree that reminded me of the ones we'd had when I was a child. I found the photo on Facebook, the one from that Christmas. My mother's living room, crowded with relatives, wrapping paper scattered across the rug. I zoomed in and searched for the gifts I'd sent. There they were. The bracelet on Tori's wrist, the scarf draped around my mother's neck, the ornaments hanging from the tree. The caption, "From all of us." From all of us. Not from Miranda. Not even from the family, including Miranda. Just a collective claim that erased my existence entirely. Tori had written that caption. She'd taken credit for gifts she'd never chosen, never paid for, never thought about. I scrolled through the comments. Hearts, thank yous. Praise for the beautiful family effort. My name didn't appear anywhere. I sat back in my chair, rubbing my temples. For years, I'd told myself that gifts were meant to be given without recognition, that love didn't need credit. But sitting here now, scrolling through the evidence, I knew better. It mattered. It mattered because the pattern was too clean. My presence was never acknowledged, but my money, my effort, my time, those were always welcome. I opened a new folder on my desktop and typed 2 words, evidence. Then I began to drag files inside. The days blurred together after that, each one marked by the same routine. Work, coffee, silence, searching. I became methodical about it. Every evening, I'd sit at my kitchen table and dig through years of emails, bank statements, and social media posts. I screenshotted every receipt where my name appeared as the payer and someone else received the credit. I saved photos from family gatherings where my contributions were visible, but my presence was mocked or ignored. The folder grew larger, icons stacking neatly in rows, each one a record of how my name had been removed while my labor remained. At work, I moved through meetings and spreadsheets with the same quiet efficiency I'd always had. No one noticed anything different. That was the thing about being reliable. People stopped looking at you. You became part of the background, like furniture that's always been there. One afternoon, a colleague asked about my Christmas plans. "Staying local this year," I said, the lie smooth on my tongue. "Quiet holiday." She nodded, already moving on to the next topic. That was fine. I didn't need her to see the fractures. I just needed to keep collecting proof. That night, I found an email from the previous year. Tori had sent it to the group thread, the one I was now locked out of, with a reminder in all caps about table runners. She'd tagged my name with a sarcastic note. "Assuming Aunt Miranda can make it on time this year." The casual cruelty of it hit differently now. Last year, I'd laughed it off, told myself she was just stressed. Now I saw it for what it was, a pattern of small cuts, each one designed to remind me of my place. And my place, I was beginning to understand, was never at the table. It was behind it, paying the bills, sending the gifts, keeping the lights on. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. Across the street, a family was decorating their porch, strings of lights wrapped around the railings, a wreath on the door. Their laughter carried faintly through the glass. Inside my apartment, there was only the ticking clock and the weight of everything I was starting to see clearly. The text came on a Saturday afternoon, just as I was considering whether to make dinner or simply skip it. Lily Cole, my youngest cousin, Ruth's daughter. We'd never been particularly close, but there had always been something different about Lily. Quieter than the others, more watchful. She sat at family gatherings like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe, taking mental notes on behaviors she didn't quite understand. Her message was short. "Can I call you?" I typed back. "Yes." The phone rang almost immediately. "I don't agree with what they did." Her voice was careful, hushed, as if someone might be listening. "I have something you need to hear." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" There was a pause, the sound of her breath catching. "I recorded it. The meeting last week, the way they talked about you. I couldn't just let it sit there." I gripped the phone tighter. "Lily, I'm sending the file. Keep it safe." "And Miranda?" Another pause. "I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner." The call ended before I could respond. A moment later, a notification appeared, an email with an audio attachment. I stared at the file name for a long time. My finger hovered over it, but I couldn't bring myself to press play. Not yet. I knew that once I heard what was on that recording, there would be no going back. No more pretending. No more benefit of the doubt. Instead, I thought about Lily. Her mother, Ruth, had been Eleanor's older sister, the one who died of cancer 3 years ago. I remembered Ruth at family gatherings, always in the background, always giving more than she received. Eleanor had treated her the same way she treated me, as useful, as convenient, as someone whose contributions could be claimed and whose presence could be dismissed. Lily had watched her mother be erased from the family narrative while she was still alive. She'd seen the pattern before I did, and now she was giving me proof. I saved the email without opening the attachment and set the phone face down on the table. Tomorrow, I would listen. Tomorrow, I would let their voices confirm what I already knew. But tonight, I let the silence settle around me like a held breath, knowing that everything was about to change. I didn't open Lily's file that night, or the next morning. I let it sit in my inbox like a grenade with the pin half pulled, knowing that the moment I pressed play, the explosion would be irreversible. Instead, I did something I should have done years ago. I opened the folder where I kept scanned copies of important documents: birth certificate, passport, tax returns, the mortgage paperwork I'd signed 4 years ago without reading closely enough. The PDF loaded slowly, each page appearing like evidence in a trial I hadn't known I was part of. I'd looked at this document before, of course, when I signed it, when the first payment came out, but I'd never really read it, not with the eyes I had now, sharpened by days of silence and the growing certainty that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The first page showed the property address in Charlotte, my mother's house, the house where I'd spent my teenage years, where Christmas dinners happened, where I was no longer welcome. The second page listed the parties involved: borrower, Eleanor Cole; co-borrower, Miranda Cole. I'd seen these words before. I'd assumed, stupidly, naively, that co-borrower meant something close to co-owner, that my name on the loan meant my name on the deed, that the $1,420 I sent every month was building something that belonged, at least in part, to me. I scrolled to the next section. Property ownership. Title held by Eleanor Cole, sole owner. The words hit me like cold water. Sole owner. Not joint ownership, not tenants in common. Sole, singular, hers. I scrolled further, searching for my name in the ownership section, hoping I'd missed something, but the language was clear, written in the unambiguous prose of legal documents. Eleanor Cole was the sole owner of the property. Miranda Cole was the co-borrower, the person whose credit and income had made the loan possible, but who held no claim to the house itself. 4 years, 48 payments, nearly $70,000 for nothing. I pushed back from the table and stood, my legs unsteady beneath me. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. I walked to the window and pressed my palm against the cold glass, letting the chill seep into my skin. I remembered the day we'd signed the papers. My mother had been nervous, or what I'd thought was nervous. Now I wondered if it was something else. Anticipation, maybe. the thrill of getting away with something. "It's just a formality," she'd said, waving her hand the way she always did when she wanted to dismiss my concerns. "The bank needs two names because of my credit history. Once the loan is established, we'll refinance and put you on the title properly." I'd believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my mother. "How long?" I'd asked. "A year, maybe two. These things take time, Randa. You know how banks are." 4 years later, nothing had changed, except now I understood. Nothing was ever going to change. The promise had been a lie from the beginning, not a plan delayed, but a manipulation executed perfectly. I pulled up the property records online, searching for the house address. The county assessor's website confirmed what the mortgage documents had shown. Eleanor Cole, sole owner. No other names listed. No pending transfers. No indication that anyone had ever intended to add me. The house I'd been paying for didn't belong to me. Had never belonged to me. Would never belong to me. And the woman who owned it had just voted to exclude me from Christmas dinner. I sat back down at the table, my hands trembling slightly as I opened the spreadsheet again. The numbers looked different now. Not just expenses, but theft. Each payment a withdrawal from my future, deposited into a life I had no legal claim to. I created a new column in the spreadsheet and labeled it Total Contribution. Then I began adding it up. Mortgage payments, property taxes, homeowners insurance, utilities, gas, electric, water, internet. The emergency repairs my mother would call about in a panic, needing money wired immediately. The small loans that were never repaid. The number at the bottom made my stomach turn. Over 4 years, I had contributed more than $120,000 to maintaining a house I didn't own for a family that had decided I wasn't welcome. I stared at the figure until my vision blurred. Then I saved the spreadsheet, closed the laptop, and sat in the growing darkness as the winter sun set outside my window. The truth was finally clear. I wasn't a daughter who'd been mistreated. I was a resource that had been exploited, and the only question left was what I was going to do about it. I called David Wheeler the next morning. David was a lawyer I'd worked with years ago when a client dispute had threatened to derail a project I was managing. He'd been sharp, thorough, and, most importantly, honest about what I could and couldn't do. I'd kept his number, the way you keep a fire extinguisher, hoping you'll never need it, but grateful when you do. He answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the measured calm of someone who spent his days navigating other people's crises. "Miranda, it's been a while. What can I do for you?" I explained the situation as concisely as I could. The mortgage, the utilities, the accounts in my name, the property I didn't own, the family that had cut me out. I heard him typing as I spoke, taking notes. When I finished, there was a pause. Then, "Let me make sure I understand. All the accounts, mortgage, utilities, insurance, they're in your name?" "Yes, I set them up. I've been paying them for 4 years." "And the property title?" "My mother's name only. I'm listed as co-borrower on the loan, but I have no ownership stake." More typing. "And you're asking what your options are?" "I'm asking if I can stop paying, if I can freeze the accounts. If there's anything illegal about cutting off access to something I've been funding without any return." David's response came without hesitation. "Miranda, everything is in your name. You opened these accounts. You've been the sole payer. That means you hold complete authority over them. Freezing them isn't just legal, it's your right." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "What about the mortgage? If I stop paying, won't that affect my credit?" "It could, yes, but there are ways to handle it. You could formally request to be removed as co-borrower, which would transfer full responsibility to your mother. Given that she's the sole owner, the bank might actually prefer that arrangement. It simplifies their paperwork." "And the utilities?" "Those are straightforward. If the accounts are in your name, you can suspend or cancel service at any time. The property owner would need to establish new accounts in her own name to restore service." I was quiet for a moment, processing. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for days began to shift, not lifting entirely, but redistributing into something I could carry. "What if they try to sue me?" I asked. for damages or breach of, I don't know, family obligation. David actually laughed, a short professional sound, but genuine. Family obligation isn't a legal concept, Miranda. You've been voluntarily paying expenses for a property you don't own. There's no contract requiring you to continue. There's no law that says you have to fund your mother's lifestyle. If anything, you could argue that you've been the victim here, contributing significant funds under the assumption of eventual ownership that was never intended. So I'm protected. Completely. Whatever you decide to do, you're within your rights. After the call ended, I sat with the phone in my hand, feeling the strange lightness of permission. For years, I'd operated under the assumption that I owed them something: my time, my money, my presence. The idea that I could simply stop had never occurred to me. It had felt impossible, like suggesting I could stop breathing. But David's words had cut through that fog. I didn't owe them anything. I never had. I opened a new document on my laptop and began making a list. Every account, every payment date, every login credential. I wrote down the steps I would need to take, the order in which I would take them, the timing that would have maximum impact. If they wanted to celebrate Christmas without me, they could do it without my money too. 3 days before Christmas, I finally opened Lily's email. I'd put it off as long as I could, finding excuses, work deadlines, errands, the need to organize my evidence folder first. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid. Not of what I would hear, but of how it would make me feel. There's a difference between suspecting something and having it confirmed in voices you recognize. I waited until evening when the apartment was quiet and the street outside had settled into the hush of a winter night. I made tea I wouldn't drink, set it on the table beside me, and opened the audio file. The recording was 10 minutes and 37 seconds long. It began mid-conversation, the sound slightly muffled. Lily must have had her phone hidden in a pocket or purse. I could hear glasses clinking, the murmur of multiple voices layered over each other. A family gathering, the kind I used to be part of. Then the voices became clearer, and I recognized them one by one. My mother spoke first, her tone carrying that particular blend of warmth and authority she used when she wanted to seem reasonable. I think we're all in agreement then. It's better for everyone this way. Katie's voice next, higher and more eager. I mean, it's not like she ever really fit in anyway. She always acts like she's better than us. My chest tightened, but I kept listening. It's the martyr complex. That was Tori, my sister. Her voice dripped with the familiar contempt she'd always barely hidden. Everything she does feels calculated, like she's keeping score, waiting for us to thank her. She is keeping score, someone muttered. Nathan, maybe. Have you seen the way she looks at us? Like she's judging. She's cold. Tori again, more emphatic now. She's always been cold, even when we were kids. Mom would ask her to do something and she'd do it, but there was never any warmth, you know? Just obligation. There was a murmur of agreement. I could picture them nodding, validating each other's version of who I was. Then my mother's voice cut through. She's not really family, she's just convenient. The word landed like a physical blow. Convenient. Not difficult, not problematic, not even disappointing. Just convenient. A tool, a utility. Bradley spoke next, his tone measured and professional, the voice he probably used in meetings at the bank. Look, let's not make this complicated. She's useful for the paperwork. Keep her name on the loan, keep her paying the bills. There's no reason to rock the boat. Exactly. My mother's approval was audible. We just need to manage the situation. She doesn't need to be here. She just needs to keep doing what she's doing. Katie giggled. So we're basically using her? We're being practical. Bradley's correction was smooth. There's a difference. The recording continued. More comments, more casual cruelty. But I'd stopped really hearing it. The words blurred together into a wall of sound, each voice another brick in a structure I was only now seeing clearly. Convenient. Cold. Not really family. Keep her paying. I pressed pause and sat in the silence that followed. The tears came slowly at first, hot against my cheeks. Not the dramatic sobbing of movies, but a quiet leak I couldn't control. I wiped at my face with the back of my hand, but more kept coming. I'd known. On some level, I'd always known. The way they looked at me, the way conversations shifted when I entered a room, the way my contributions were accepted but never acknowledged. I'd felt the truth for years without letting myself name it. But hearing it spoken aloud, in their voices, recorded without their knowledge, stripped away every defense I'd built, every excuse I'd made for them, every time I'd told myself I was being too sensitive, reading too much into things, expecting too much from people who were just stressed or didn't mean it that way. They meant it, every word. I pressed play again, forcing myself to listen to the rest. There was more discussion about Christmas logistics, who was bringing what, when people would arrive. My absence was treated as a minor administrative detail. One less plate to set, one less chair to arrange. Near the end, my mother's voice returned, softer now. I gave her everything. She should be grateful. The recording ended. I sat in the dark for a long time, letting the silence settle around me. The tea had gone cold. My face was tight from dried tears. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of a car passing, its headlights briefly illuminating the blinds before sweeping away. Then I stood up, walked to the sink, and washed my face with cold water. I looked at myself in the small mirror above the basin, eyes red, skin blotchy, and took a deep breath. The tears had been necessary, but they weren't the end. I returned to my laptop and dragged the audio file into the evidence folder. I renamed it with the date and a simple description: family_meeting_recording_voices_identified.mp3. Then I opened the banking app on my phone and stared at the mortgage account. The next payment was scheduled for January 1st, 6 days away. I navigated to the account settings and found the option I'd researched days ago: freeze account. My thumb hovered over the button. This was the point of no return. Once I pressed it, everything would change. There would be no going back to the family I'd tried so hard to belong to, because that family had never existed. It was a performance I'd funded, a play I'd paid admission to but was never allowed on stage. I pressed the button. Your request to freeze this account has been submitted. A small green checkmark blinked. Confirmed. I moved to the next account. Electric, freeze. Gas, freeze. Internet, freeze. One by one, I shut down every utility I'd been paying for. Each confirmation felt like a lock clicking into place, not trapping me, but protecting me, building a wall between who I'd been and who I was becoming. By 3 a.m., it was done. Every account frozen, suspended, or scheduled to terminate. My evidence folder bulged with screenshots and confirmations. The apartment was dark except for the blue glow of my laptop screen. I closed the lid and sat in the silence. Convenient, they'd called me. They were about to learn how inconvenient I could be. I woke the next morning with swollen eyes and an unexpected clarity. The tears from the night before had been necessary, a final mourning for the family I'd wanted but never had. But in their wake, something harder had crystallized. Not anger, exactly. Something colder, more deliberate. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the winter sun struggle through the clouds. The recording played in my head without my permission, fragments surfacing like debris after a flood. Cold, convenient, not really family. But alongside the words came a strange relief. For years, I'd doubted myself. Every time I felt hurt by something they said or did, I'd questioned whether I was overreacting, being too sensitive, expecting too much. I'd twisted myself into knots trying to understand why I never quite fit, what I was doing wrong, how I could try harder. Now I knew I'd never fit because I was never meant to. The role they'd assigned me wasn't family member. It was service provider, and service providers don't get seats at the table. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily. They're all fighting, blaming each other. No one's saying your name, but they know. I saved the screenshot and added it to my folder. The day passed quietly. I cleaned my apartment with methodical precision, organizing drawers, wiping surfaces, creating order in a space that was entirely mine. There was something therapeutic about it, about controlling what I could control while the things I couldn't spun out beyond my walls. In the afternoon, I called David Wheeler again to confirm the timeline. The mortgage freeze would take effect immediately, blocking the January payment. The utilities were scheduled to shut off on Christmas Eve, December 24th at 6 p.m., according to the confirmation emails. Enough time for them to be mid-celebration when the lights went out. "Are you sure about the timing?" David asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I'm sure. It's going to cause chaos." "I know." He paused. "I'm not judging you, Miranda. I just want to make sure you've thought it through." I had. I'd thought about almost nothing else for days, and I'd come to a conclusion that surprised me with its simplicity. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for clarity. For years, my family had operated under the assumption that I would always be there, always paying, always absorbing whatever they needed. They'd built their lives on my invisible labor. It was time for them to see exactly what they'd been standing on. December 23rd, one day before Christmas Eve. I reviewed everything one final time. The evidence folder contained 47 files, screenshots of bank statements, utility confirmations, the audio recording, copies of the mortgage documents, photos scraped from social media showing gifts I'd sent being credited to others. Every piece dated and labeled, organized into subfolders by category. I'd also drafted 3 emails. They sat in my outbox unsent. The first was addressed to Rachel Carter, the reporter at the Charlotte Observer I'd worked with on a charity drive years ago. It contained attachments, selected documents, the financial records, a timeline of payments. No accusations, just facts. I'd written a brief note explaining that I wanted the truth documented, nothing more. The second was to the director of the nonprofit where my mother volunteered, the organization that ran the annual Christmas potluck she loved to host. I'd attached records showing that the generous donations Eleanor Cole had been credited with were actually funded by accounts in my name. Again, just facts. Let them draw their own conclusions. The third was to Bradley's supervisor at the bank. This one was more targeted. The audio clip where he discussed keeping my name on loan paperwork for convenience, combined with documentation showing that I had no ownership stake in the property. For a banking professional, the implications were clear. He'd been complicit in a financial arrangement that, while not technically illegal, raised serious ethical questions about his judgment. I hadn't decided yet whether to send them. The frozen accounts would speak loudly enough on their own. But having the emails ready felt like holding a second card, something to play if the first didn't land. That evening, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. "Miranda?" The voice was older, female, slightly breathless. "It's Dorothy Fisher, from down the hall. We haven't really talked much, but I wanted to check on you." I blinked. Mrs. Fisher. Dot, as she'd asked me to call her the one time we'd had a real conversation, was the kind of neighbor who noticed things without being nosy. A retired nurse, widowed with grown children who visited twice a year. "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Why do you ask?" "I saw the news about your mother's charity group, the article online." A pause. "I put 2 and 2 together. I'm sorry, dear." I hadn't seen any article yet. I pulled up the Charlotte Observer website on my laptop while keeping the phone pressed to my ear. There it was. A small piece buried in the local section. Questions raised about charity contributions. The article mentioned discrepancies in donation records and a review being conducted by the nonprofit board. My mother's name wasn't in the headline, but it was in the 3rd paragraph. I hadn't sent Rachel the email. She must have received information from another source, or perhaps she'd already been investigating. "I didn't know about this," I told Dot honestly. "I figured as much. You don't seem like someone who'd orchestrate something so public." She paused. "I just wanted you to know that whatever happened between you and your family, you're not alone. You've always seemed like a good person, Miranda. Don't let them make you doubt that." After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand, unexpectedly moved. A near stranger had shown me more kindness in a 2-minute call than my family had in years. I looked at the 3 draft emails again. Then I closed the laptop without sending them. The accounts were frozen. The utilities were scheduled to shut off tomorrow. Whatever came next, I'd let it unfold naturally. I didn't need to push. The weight I'd been carrying for them was already in free fall. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in weeks. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve, and for the first time in my adult life, I wouldn't be driving to Charlotte, arms full of gifts no one would thank me for, hoping this year would be different. This year, I was staying home, and they were about to discover exactly what my absence meant. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in a brittle gray sky, the kind that holds its cold high and lets it sink slowly into everything below. I woke late, tangled in blankets on the couch where I'd fallen asleep watching something forgettable on television. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the heater cycling on. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be. No gifts to wrap at the last minute. No cookies to bake at 2 a.m. because I'd promised to bring something homemade. No 3-hour drive to Charlotte rehearsing conversations in my head, preparing myself to smile through whatever small cruelties awaited. I made coffee slowly, savoring the ritual. Eggs scrambled with cheese, toast with butter. I ate at my kitchen table, looking out the window at the empty street below. Most people were already where they needed to be, homes filled with family, tables being set, ovens warming. My phone sat silent on the counter. I didn't check it. The day stretched out before me like a held breath. I read. I cleaned. I took a walk to the corner store for milk I didn't really need, just to feel the cold air on my face and watch my breath fog in front of me. The sidewalks were nearly deserted, everyone tucked away in their celebrations. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened to the color of pewter. I made myself tea and settled into the armchair by the window with a book I'd been meaning to finish for months. The words blurred on the page. I wasn't really reading, just occupying my hands while my mind wandered elsewhere. I thought about the house in Charlotte. Right now, they'd be gathering, cars pulling into the driveway, coats being hung in the front closet, the kitchen filling with the smell of roasting meat, and my mother's voice directing traffic like she always did. Put that there? No, not like that. Katie, did you bring the wine? I wondered if anyone had mentioned my name. If there'd been a moment of awkwardness, a brief acknowledgement of the empty space where I should have been. Or if they'd simply closed ranks, rearranged the chairs, and carried on as if I'd never existed at all. Probably the latter. The clock on my wall read 5:47 p.m. I set down my book and picked up my phone. The confirmation emails were still there, time-stamped and official. Service termination scheduled for December 24th, 6 p.m. 13 minutes. I put the phone back down and returned to my book, but my eyes kept drifting to the window, to the street outside, to the warm glow of my neighbor's Christmas lights blinking in their steady rhythm. At 6:03 p.m., my phone buzzed. Then again, and again. I let it vibrate against the table for a full minute before picking it up. The screen was flooded with notifications, texts arriving faster than I could read them. The first was from Nathan. Power just went out. The second, seconds later, from Katie. Everything's black. Your mom is screaming at the circuit breaker. Then Tori. The caterer tried to run the card. Declined. No one can pay for anything. I scrolled through the messages as they continued to pour in. Each one a snapshot of chaos unfolding 200 miles away. Guests are confused. Someone's lighting candles. The turkey's going to get cold. Bradley's on the phone with the power company. They said the account is inactive. I set the phone down and walked to the window. The house across the street glowed warm and bright, strings of lights twinkling along the roofline. Through the window, I could see figures moving, a family probably gathered around their tree. The faint sound of music drifted through the glass. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. Tori. Did you do this? I didn't respond. Another buzz. Katie this time. The power company said the primary account holder froze the account. What the hell, Miranda? I picked up my tea, found it had gone cold, and poured it down the sink. Then I made myself a fresh cup, moving slowly, deliberately. The kettle whistled, steam rose. I watched it curl and disappear. More messages arrived. I read them without replying. People are leaving. Half the guests are already gone. Mom looks like she's going to faint. Bradley found some candles, but it's not enough. The food is ruined. Everyone's asking what happened. The final message came from Nathan just before 7 p.m. Everyone's gone. House is dark. Mom keeps saying your name. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and returned to my chair by the window. The street was quiet. Snow had begun to fall, light flurries that caught the glow of the street lamps and drifted down like confetti. My neighbor's house still blazed with light and warmth. Somewhere inside, people were laughing, celebrating together. And in Charlotte, a house that I'd kept lit for 4 years sat dark and cold, its celebration in ruins. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel guilty either. What I felt was something stranger, a hollow kind of peace, like the silence after a storm passes. The worst was over. The waiting was done. I pulled my blanket tighter around my shoulders and watched the snow fall until my eyes grew heavy. For the first time in years, I slept through Christmas Eve without dreaming of a table that had no seat for me. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, sunlight glinting off the fresh snow that had blanketed the city overnight. I woke slowly, stretching under warm covers, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: peace. My phone was still where I'd left it, face down on the kitchen counter. When I finally picked it up, the notification count had climbed past 50. I scrolled through them methodically, screenshotting each one before moving to the next. The messages had evolved overnight from panic to anger to something approaching desperation. Tori at 8:15 p.m. "This is insane! You've lost your mind!" Katie at 9:02 p.m. "I can't believe you would do this to your own family." Bradley at 10:47 p.m. "We need to talk. This is a legal matter now." My mother at 11:33 p.m. "Miranda, call me. We can fix this." I saved each screenshot to my evidence folder, labeling them with timestamps. Then I made myself breakfast, eggs again, toast again, coffee strong and black, and sat down to review the damage. A quick search of social media told me what I needed to know. Katie had posted a cryptic message late last night. Some people only care about themselves. Family means nothing to them. It had accumulated sympathetic comments from people who had no idea what they were actually responding to. Tori's page was locked down, set to private. Nathan hadn't posted anything. Lily had sent me a single text at 2 a.m. "They're still fighting. No one's sleeping. Merry Christmas." I replied for the first time. "Thank you for everything. Merry Christmas." The morning passed quietly. I watched a movie I'd seen before, letting the familiar dialogue wash over me without really listening. Around noon, my phone rang, Tori's name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let that go too. The third time, she left a message. I played it back, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "You need to call me back. Right now. Do you have any idea what you've done? Mom's a wreck. The whole family saw, everyone saw what happened. This isn't over, Miranda. This isn't even close to over." I saved the voicemail and added it to my folder. Bradley called next. His message was shorter, more professional, but with an edge of threat beneath the surface. "Miranda, this is Bradley. We need to discuss the financial implications of what's happened. I strongly suggest you return this call before this situation escalates further." I didn't call back. My mother tried twice more throughout the afternoon. Each time, I watched her name appear on my screen, watched the phone vibrate against the table, and let it ring through to voicemail. Her messages grew progressively more emotional, first stiff and formal, then pleading, then something that sounded almost like anger dressed up as hurt. "I don't understand why you're doing this. After everything I've done for you." I listened to that one 3 times. "After everything I've done for you." The words landed with a kind of dark comedy. What exactly had she done for me? Given me life, I supposed. Raised me in a house I later paid for. Took credit for gifts I bought, meals I funded, celebrations I made possible. The evidence folder on my laptop had grown to over 50 files. Screenshots, recordings, bank statements, mortgage documents. A comprehensive record of everything I'd given and everything I'd been denied. That evening, an email appeared in my inbox from Rachel Carter, the reporter at the Charlotte Observer. The subject line was simple: following up. I opened it. "Miranda, I've received documentation regarding financial support for the Cole property. Several sources have confirmed the authenticity. I wanted to reach out directly before moving forward with any coverage. Would you be willing to speak on background? I'm not looking to expose anyone unnecessarily, but there are questions being raised about charitable contribution claims that I think deserve answers. Let me know if you're open to a conversation. Rachel. I read the email twice. I hadn't sent her anything. The draft in my outbox remained unsent, which meant someone else had. Lily, perhaps. Or maybe Rachel had been investigating Eleanor's charity involvement independently, and the timing was coincidental. I typed a brief reply. The documentation is accurate. Every receipt is mine. The payments, the utilities, the mortgage, all of it. I'm not looking for publicity, but I'm willing to confirm facts if needed. Miranda. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The snow outside had begun to melt, revealing patches of brown grass beneath. The neighbors' Christmas lights still blinked in their endless rhythm. Somewhere in Charlotte, my family was dealing with the wreckage of a holiday I'd finally stopped funding. I poured myself a glass of wine, the first I'd had in weeks, and raised it to the empty room. "Merry Christmas," I said to no one. The silence felt like company. The day after Christmas, Rachel Carter's article went live. It was buried in the local section, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. The headline was measured, "Questions raised about local charity event funding." But the content was devastating. The article detailed how the annual Christmas potluck hosted by Eleanor Cole, a beloved community tradition that had been credited with feeding hundreds of less fortunate families each year, had been primarily funded not by Eleanor's personal generosity, as widely believed, but by accounts held in the name of a family member who was not publicly credited. My name wasn't mentioned, but the trail was clear for anyone who wanted to follow it. By noon, the nonprofit's website had been updated. Photos from previous events disappeared. Eleanor's name vanished from the board listing and the donor acknowledgments. In their place was a brief statement thanking the community for their support and announcing a review of organizational practices. I watched it happen from my apartment, refreshing pages and taking screenshots with the detached precision of someone documenting a crime scene. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. Not exactly. It was something closer to vindication. For years, my mother had built her reputation on work I'd paid for. Now the foundation was crumbling and everyone could see what had been underneath. My phone continued to buzz with messages I didn't answer. Tori had shifted from anger to a kind of strategic desperation, alternating between threats and appeals to family loyalty. Katie sent long paragraphs about how I was tearing the family apart. Bradley's messages had become clipped and formal, hinting at legal consequences without specifying what they might be. The only message I responded to was from Lily. "They're blaming each other now. Tori says it's Bradley's fault for the loan stuff. Mom's blaming Tori for the social media posts. No one's talking about what they actually did to you." I wrote back, "They never will." That afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it cautiously. The man on the line introduced himself as a compliance officer from the bank where Bradley worked. His voice was clipped, professional. "Ms. Cole, we've received an audio file containing statements made by Mr. Bradley Cole regarding loan documentation practices. I'm calling to confirm. Were you the one who submitted this recording?" I hadn't sent anything to the bank. I'd drafted an email but never sent it, which meant someone else had, Lily again, probably, or perhaps one of the other cousins who'd grown tired of Bradley's smug certainty. "I can confirm the recording is authentic," I said carefully. "The voices are family members. The conversation occurred at a recent gathering. And are you willing to provide a statement regarding the context?" I considered for a moment. "I'll provide whatever documentation you need. The facts speak for themselves." After the call ended, I sat in the quiet apartment and thought about Bradley. His carefully constructed professional image, his confidence that he could manage any situation, control any narrative. Right now, he was probably sitting in a meeting room somewhere, listening to his own voice played back to him. "Keep her name on the papers. It's clean. No need to rock the boat." The boat was rocking now, and Bradley was going overboard. She came on the third day after Christmas. I heard the knock before I was ready for it. Firm, controlled, the kind of knock that expects to be answered. I looked through the peephole and saw my mother standing in the hallway, her posture rigid, her face arranged in an expression I knew well. wounded dignity preparing for battle. I opened the door. "Miranda?" Her voice was cool. "May I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. She walked into my apartment like she was inspecting it, her eyes moving across the small space, the kitchen where I'd eaten so many meals alone, the window where I'd watched the snow fall on Christmas Eve, the couch where I'd slept without dreaming of her table. If she noticed how sparse it was, how different from the house I'd been paying for, she didn't comment. "I assume you know why I'm here." She turned to face me, arms crossed over her chest. "I can guess." "What you did—" She stopped, took a breath, visibly collecting herself. "What you did was unconscionable, humiliating us in front of the entire community, destroying Bradley's career, making us look like fools." "Making you look like fools," I repeated slowly. "That's what you're upset about, how it looked." "Don't twist my words." "I'm not twisting anything, Mom. I'm just listening to what you're actually saying." She stiffened. I'd never called her out so directly before. The old Miranda would have backed down by now, apologizing for causing trouble, promising to fix whatever needed fixing. But that Miranda had died somewhere between the voicemail and the frozen accounts. "You've always been like this," she said, her tone shifting to something I recognized. The martyr's voice, the long-suffering mother. "Keeping score, waiting for people to notice how much you've sacrificed. You could never just be part of the family, could you? You always had to be special." "I wasn't keeping score. I was keeping records. There's a difference." "Records of what? Of being a good daughter? Of helping your family? Of paying for a house I don't own? Of funding holidays I wasn't welcome at? Of sending gifts that someone else took credit for?" I kept my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "I have 4 years of bank statements, Mom. Would you like to see them?" Her jaw tightened. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. This coldness, this calculation. Everything has to be a transaction with you. Funny. That's almost exactly what Tori said in the recording." The color drained from her face. "What recording?" "The one from your family meeting. The one where you all decided I wasn't welcome at Christmas. The one where Bradley suggested keeping my name on the loan because it was convenient. The one where you said I wasn't really family." For a moment, she had nothing to say. I watched her process, the realization that her private words had been captured, preserved, turned into evidence. "Lily," she finally said, the name landing like an accusation. "Does it matter who? The point is what was said. By you. By Tori. By all of you." That was taken out of context. No, it wasn't. I listened to the whole thing. 10 minutes of my family discussing how to keep using me while cutting me out of your lives. She changed tactics, her voice softening to something that was supposed to sound like hurt. "After everything I did for you, Miranda, after everything I sacrificed—" "What did you sacrifice exactly?" I cut her off, surprising us both. "Name one thing." "I raised you. I fed you. I put a roof over your head." "A roof you asked me to pay for. A house you put in your name only. A loan you never intended to share. That's not— The bank required a cosigner because your credit wasn't good enough. I know. I've read the documents now. I've read them very carefully." We stared at each other across the small living room. Outside, I could hear a car passing, children shouting in the distance, the ordinary sounds of a world that kept moving regardless of what happened in this room. "You were always your father's daughter." Her voice had turned cold now, the mask slipping. "Cold. Stubborn. Thinking you were better than everyone else. He was the same way." Something shifted in me at the mention of my father. "Don't bring him into this." "Why not? You're just like him. He tried to control everything too. Tried to take what wasn't his." "He left when I was 8 years old. He abandoned us." "Is that what you think?" A strange smile crossed her face, bitter, almost triumphant. "Is that the story you've been telling yourself all these years?" The room felt suddenly smaller, the air harder to breathe. "What are you talking about?" "Your father didn't abandon anyone. He fought for custody, fought for years. He wanted to take you from me, raise you himself, fill your head with lies about what kind of mother I was." I shook my head. That's not. I stopped him. I had to. He would have poisoned you against me. Her voice rose, old anger bleeding through. He sent letters, cards on your birthdays, Christmas presents every year. I made sure you never saw any of them. I protected you from him. The words hit me like physical blows. Letters, cards, presents, sent by a father I'd spent my whole life believing had simply walked away and never looked back. He's dead now. I barely recognized my own voice. He died 5 years ago. I found out through a Google search. Good. The word came out sharp, final. He can't hurt anyone anymore. I stared at my mother, this woman I'd spent 37 years trying to please, trying to earn love from, trying to prove I was worthy of, and saw her clearly for the first time. Not a mother who'd been abandoned and made the best of it. Not a woman who'd sacrificed everything for her children, but someone who'd systematically cut me off from my father, built a narrative of abandonment to explain his absence, and used my resulting guilt and insecurity to keep me loyal, compliant, paying. My whole life had been built on a lie. Get out, she blinked. Excuse me? Get out of my apartment. Miranda, we're not finished. Yes, we are. I moved to the door and opened it. You can leave now. She hesitated, and for a moment I thought she might refuse, might dig in and demand we continue this conversation she'd planned to control. But something in my face must have told her I was beyond persuasion. She gathered herself, straightened her coat, and walked to the door with as much dignity as she could muster. She paused at the threshold. You'll regret this. When you're alone, when you have no one. I've been alone my whole life, Mom. I just didn't know it until now. I closed the door on whatever she was about to say next. Then I leaned against it, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor, my back pressed to the cold wood. The apartment was silent except for my own breathing. I didn't cry. I felt hollowed out, emptied of something I hadn't even known I was carrying. For 37 years, I'd believed I was the child who wasn't enough. Not enough to make my father stay. Not enough to earn my mother's unconditional love. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to compensate, trying to prove my worth through sacrifice and service and silent endurance. And it had all been based on a lie. My father hadn't left me. He'd been taken from me. He'd fought to stay in my life, and my mother had made sure he couldn't. Every letter intercepted, every gift confiscated, every attempt at connection severed before it could begin. I pulled my knees to my chest and sat there for a long time, letting the truth reshape everything I thought I knew about myself. When I finally stood, the room looked different. Not physically, the same furniture, the same windows, the same quiet space I'd made my own. But something had shifted inside me. The desperate child who'd spent her life trying to earn love that was never going to come had finally stopped trying. I walked to my bookshelf and looked at the small photo I'd printed a few days ago. My father's face, found in an old obituary, the first time I'd seen him clearly since I was 8 years old. I'd put it there without really knowing why. Now I understood. He'd tried. He'd fought. And even though he'd lost, even though he'd died without ever getting to explain, I knew now that he hadn't given up on me. That knowledge, strange as it was, felt like the first solid ground I'd stood on in years. I spent the next 2 days searching. Public records, ancestry websites, obituary archives, court documents that were harder to find but not impossible if you knew where to look. I tracked down every trace of my father I could find, piecing together the life he'd lived after my mother erased him from mine. His name was Thomas Allen Cole. He'd been a high school history teacher in Virginia, at a small school 2 hours from Charlotte. He'd never remarried. He'd lived alone in a modest house, volunteered at a local veterans organization, coached the junior varsity debate team. According to his obituary, he was beloved by students and colleagues alike. I found references to the custody battle in old court filings, heavily redacted but enough to confirm what my mother had said. He'd fought, for years. He'd hired lawyers he probably couldn't afford, filed motion after motion, appealed every ruling that went against him. The documents painted a picture of a man who refused to give up, even as the system slowly ground him down. In the end, my mother had won, not through evidence or argument, but through endurance. She'd outlasted him, worn him down, made the fight too expensive and too exhausting to continue. The final ruling granted her sole custody with supervised visitation she then made impossible by moving, changing numbers, blocking every attempt at contact. I found a box of returned mail in a forum post from someone who'd known him, a colleague who'd written a memorial tribute. Tom kept every letter he wrote to his daughter, the post said. He never stopped hoping she'd write back. He went to his grave believing she'd chosen to forget him. I read that line 5 times. He'd died thinking I didn't want him, thinking I'd received his letters and chosen not to respond, thinking his own daughter had rejected him the way her mother had. The injustice of it took my breath away. I made calls. I found the nursing home where he'd spent his final months. I tracked down the name of his executor, a cousin I'd never met, someone from his side of the family that my mother had made sure I never knew existed. When I finally reached the executor on the phone, he was wary at first. Then I explained who I was. "Miranda?" His voice changed, softened. "Tom talked about you all the time. He had your picture on his nightstand right up until the end." I couldn't speak for a moment. "I didn't know," I finally managed. "I never knew he was trying to reach me. My mother, she intercepted everything." There was a long pause. "He always suspected that's what happened. He never blamed you, though. He said if you ever came looking, I should give you the letters." "The letters?" "He saved copies of everyone he sent, along with some other things, photographs, a journal he kept. He wanted you to have them. I've been holding on to the box, just in case." I gave him my address, barely able to keep my voice steady. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and stared at nothing. My father had kept a box for me. For 30 years, he'd held on to hope that I'd come looking for him, and he'd prepared for that moment, assembling evidence of his love so that I would finally understand. It was, in its way, exactly what I'd been doing these past weeks, building a record, collecting proof, preparing for the moment when the truth would finally be known. I was my father's daughter, after all, just not in the way my mother had meant it. The call came on a Thursday morning, 3 days after my mother's visit. I was making coffee when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Ms. Cole, this is Richard Hayward, Regional Compliance Officer for First Carolina Bank." The voice was clipped, professional, the kind that delivered bad news for a living. "I'm calling regarding an audio recording we've received involving Mr. Bradley Cole." I set down the coffee pot. "Yes?" The recording contains statements by Mr. Cole regarding loan documentation practices, specifically his recommendation to maintain a co-borrower's name on mortgage papers for the purpose of financial convenience, without that individual's knowledge of the arrangement's full implications. A pause. "Effective immediately, Mr. Cole has been placed on administrative leave pending a full review." I leaned against the counter, processing. "I see. We're conducting an internal investigation into whether any banking regulations or ethical guidelines were violated. I'm calling to confirm. Are you the co-borrower referenced in the recording?" "I am." "And were you aware, at the time of signing, that you would have no ownership stake in the property?" I thought about the kitchen in Charlotte 4 years ago, my mother waving her hand, promising we'd fix it later. I thought about how desperately I'd wanted to help, how easily I'd signed without reading, how much I'd trusted people who saw me as nothing more than a useful signature. "I was told it was temporary," I said. "I was told my name would be added to the title once the loan was established. That never happened." More typing on his end. "Thank you for confirming. We may need a formal statement as the investigation proceeds. Would you be willing to provide one?" "Yes, whatever you need." After the call ended, I stood in my kitchen and let the implications settle. Bradley. Smug, calculated Bradley, who'd spoken about keeping my name on papers like I was a line item in a spreadsheet, was now facing professional consequences. His career, built on the image of competence and trustworthiness, was crumbling because of words he'd never imagined anyone would hear. My phone buzzed again. Lily. "Bradley's been suspended from work. Tori is losing her mind. She's blaming everyone. You, Mom, Bradley himself. The kids are confused. It's chaos. I typed back, I didn't send the recording to the bank. Her response came quickly. I know, I did. I stared at the screen. He sat in that room and talked about you like you were furniture, she continued. Like you didn't matter. I couldn't let him keep getting away with it. Someone had to see who he really is. I didn't know what to say. Lily had taken a risk, a bigger one than I'd taken in some ways. She was still inside the family, still subject to their judgment and retaliation, and she'd chosen to act anyway. Thank you, I finally wrote. But be careful. They'll figure out it was you. I know. I don't care anymore. I set the phone down and poured my now lukewarm coffee. Outside, the January sun was bright but pale, offering light without warmth. I thought about Bradley in some conference room, listening to his own voice played back to him. I thought about Tori, her perfect life suddenly not so perfect. I thought about my mother, watching her carefully constructed world come apart at the seams. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel guilty either. What I felt was tired, the exhaustion that comes after a long journey, when you finally stop walking and realize how far you've come. Later that afternoon, an email arrived from Rachel Carter. Miranda, the article has generated significant response. The nonprofit board has announced Eleanor Cole's resignation from all volunteer positions, effective immediately. Several community members have come forward with their own questions about donation attribution. I wanted you to know before it becomes public. Thank you for your honesty. Rachel. I read it twice, then closed my laptop. My mother's charity work, the thing she'd been most proud of, the source of her community standing and social capital, was gone. Not because I'd destroyed it, but because the truth had finally caught up with her. She'd built her reputation on my invisible labor, and now everyone could see the foundation had been hollow all along. I thought I'd feel something more. Satisfaction, maybe, or vindication. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness. Not sad, exactly, but not happy either. Just finished, like closing a book I'd been reading for too long. The phone rang. Tori's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was different this time, less angry, more desperate. Miranda, please, we need to talk. Bradley's career is ruined. Mom won't stop crying. Everything's falling apart. I know we've had our differences, but we're still family. You can't just... The recording cut off at the time limit. I deleted it without saving. The next morning brought a text from Nathan, the first direct communication I'd received from him since Christmas. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I went along with everything because it was easier. That doesn't make it right. I'm sorry. I read it several times, surprised by its simplicity. No excuses, no justifications. Just an apology. It wasn't enough to heal anything, but it was more than anyone else had offered. I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that." His response came immediately. "For what it's worth, I never thought you were cold. I think you were the only one who saw things clearly. The rest of us were just too comfortable to look." I didn't reply to that. I didn't know how. The rest of the day passed in a blur of small tasks, laundry, groceries, emails for work I'd been neglecting. Normal life, continuing despite everything. It felt strange to go through ordinary motions while my family imploded 200 miles away, but also necessary. The world didn't stop because my mother had lost her charity position. Bills still needed paying, dishes still piled up in the sink. That evening, Lily called instead of texting. "They know it was me," she said without preamble. "About the recording. Tori figured it out." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. She screamed at me for an hour, called me a traitor, said I'd destroyed the family." A pause. "Then Bradley told her to shut up and she started crying. It was actually kind of satisfying." I almost laughed. "Lily!" "I'm serious. I've been watching them treat you like garbage for years. Watching them use you and dismiss you and pretend like you didn't matter. And I never said anything because I was afraid." Her voice hardened. "I'm done being afraid. If they want to cut me out too, fine. At least I'll know I did the right thing. You didn't have to do any of this for me. I didn't do it for you. I mean, not only for you." She took a breath. My mom went through the same thing. Eleanor treated her like a servant her whole life, took credit for everything she did, made her feel worthless. When Mom got sick, Eleanor barely visited. Too busy with her charity work, her community image. Mom died thinking she was never good enough, and Eleanor gave a eulogy about what a devoted sister she'd been. I remembered Ruth, quiet, always in the background, always giving. I remembered her funeral, my mother's crocodile tears, the way she'd accepted condolences like she was the one who'd suffered most. I wasn't going to let the same thing happen to you, Lily continued. I couldn't save my mom, but I could at least make sure you knew the truth. We talked for another hour, about her graduate program, about my job, about everything except the family drama we were both drowning in. When we finally hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Connection. Real connection. Not the performance of it. Maybe Lily was right. Maybe family wasn't about blood. Maybe it was about the people who showed up when everyone else walked away. The package arrived on a gray January afternoon. I found it on my doorstep when I returned from work. A medium-sized cardboard box, battered from shipping, with a return address in Virginia I didn't recognize. My father's executor, I realized. The letters he'd promised. I carried it inside carefully, like it might break if I moved too fast. Set it on the kitchen table, stared at it for a long moment before finding the courage to open it. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was 30 years of love I'd never known existed. Letters. Dozens of them. Handwritten on lined paper, dated and organized chronologically, each one addressed to me and returned unopened. Birthday cards for every year from age 8 to 37, some store-bought, some hand-drawn, all containing messages I'd never read. Photographs, my father at various ages, sometimes alone, sometimes with people I didn't recognize. A journal, thick with entries, the first one dated the day after he'd lost custody. I picked up the journal first. Today, the court ruled against me. I have to believe this isn't the end. Miranda is my daughter, and nothing they say or do can change that. I will keep fighting. I will keep writing. And someday, when she's old enough to understand, she'll know the truth. I turned the pages slowly, reading his words across decades, his hope when he sent each letter, his heartbreak when they were returned, his determination to keep trying, year after year, even as the silence stretched longer and longer. Today is Miranda's 16th birthday. I sent a card, like I always do. I don't know if Eleanor lets her see them. I don't know if she even knows I'm still here, still thinking about her, still loving her. But I have to believe that someday, somehow, she'll find out. And when she does, I want her to know I never stopped. The tears came without warning. Not the quiet leak of Christmas Eve, but real sobs that shook my shoulders and blurred my vision. I cried for the father I'd lost, for the years we'd missed, for the man who'd spent 3 decades loving a daughter who didn't know he existed. I cried for the child I'd been, desperate for love, believing she'd been abandoned when the truth was exactly the opposite. I cried until I had nothing left. When I finally stopped, the apartment was dark. I hadn't turned on the lights. The sun had set while I was lost in my father's words. I wiped my face and stood on unsteady legs, walking to the window. The street below was quiet. My neighbor's Christmas lights were finally down, replaced by the ordinary glow of porch lamps and window light. A car passed slowly, its headlights sweeping across the pavement. I looked down at the journal still clutched in my hands. I've accepted that I may never see Miranda again, the final entry read, dated 3 months before his death, but I've saved everything. Every letter, every card, every photograph. I've given the box to my cousin with instructions to hold on to it just in case, because even if she never comes looking, I want her to know she was loved. I want her to know I tried. He'd kept hope alive for 30 years, through every returned letter, every failed legal motion, every birthday and Christmas that passed in silence. He'd never given up on me, and now, finally, I understood why I'd never been able to give up either. Why I'd kept paying bills for people who didn't appreciate me, kept showing up for a family that didn't want me, kept trying to earn love that was never going to come. I'd been looking for my father without knowing it, looking for someone who would see me, value me, refuse to let me go. He'd been there all along. I just hadn't known where to look. A knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Dot standing in the hallway, a plate of cookies in her hands and concern in her eyes. "I saw your light wasn't on," she said. "Wanted to make sure you were okay." I must have looked terrible. Red eyes, tear-streaked face, still holding the journal like a lifeline. But Dot didn't comment on any of it. She just held out the cookies and waited. "I'm okay," I said, my voice rough. "I just got some mail." She nodded like that explained everything. "Mind if I come in for a minute?" I stepped aside and she walked in like she belonged there. Not pushy, not presumptuous, just comfortable. She set the cookies on the counter and looked around my dim apartment with the same gentle assessment she always had. "You've been through a lot lately," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "Want to talk about it, or would you rather just have some company?" I thought about the question. Really thought about it. The old Miranda would have said she was fine, would have smiled and made small talk and hidden all the broken pieces where no one could see them. But the old Miranda was gone, buried under the weight of everything I'd learned about myself and my family. "Company," I said. "Company would be nice." We sat at my kitchen table with cookies and tea, not saying much. Dot told me about her grandchildren, about the book she was reading, about the annoying habits of the tenant 2 floors up. I listened, grateful for the normalcy of it, for the simple pleasure of human presence without expectation or judgment. "You know," she said as she was leaving, "family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people who choose you. And sometimes—" She paused at the door, looking back at me. "Sometimes it's just someone who shows up with cookies when the lights are off." After she left, I sat alone in my apartment and let her words settle around me like a blanket. Family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people who choose you. For the first time in my life, I thought I might actually believe that. The bank in downtown Durham was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon. I parked my car, gathered the folder from the passenger seat, and walked inside with steady steps. The air was warm, the carpet soft underfoot, the hum of conversation low and professional. I gave my name to the receptionist and was directed to a loan officer's desk in the back. The paperwork took less time than I'd expected. "You're removing yourself as co-borrower," the officer confirmed, reviewing my documents. "This transfers full liability for the mortgage to Eleanor Cole as the sole owner." "That's correct." "Have you consulted with a financial advisor about this decision? It will affect your credit history and remove any claim you might have." "I have no claim," I interrupted gently. "I'm not on the title. I never was. I was just the person paying." He looked at me for a long moment, something like understanding flickering across his professional face. Then he nodded and slid the forms across the desk. I signed my name 3 times. Each signature felt like cutting a rope that had been wrapped around my chest for years. The officer stamped the papers, the sound sharp in the quiet office, and handed me copies for my records. "That's everything. The transfer will be processed within 5 to 7 business days." I stood, shook his hand, and walked out into the January sunlight. The air was cold, but I barely felt it. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching my breath fog in front of me, feeling the strange lightness of release. 4 years of payments, nearly $70,000 of my money, and now it was over. The house wasn't my responsibility anymore. The mortgage, the taxes, the utilities, all of it transferred to the woman who'd been living there all along, enjoying the benefits of my labor while denying me a place at her table. Let her figure out how to pay for it herself. I drove home through streets lined with bare trees and gray sky, the radio playing softly, my mind pleasantly empty. When I pulled into my parking spot, I sat for a moment with the engine off, just breathing. It was done. The financial chains that had bound me to my mother were severed. I would never again write a check for her mortgage or wonder if she appreciated anything I'd sacrificed. The accounts were closed, the payments stopped, the obligation dissolved. I was free. The apartment felt different when I walked in. Not physically. The same furniture, the same windows, the same quiet space I'd made my own over 5 years. But something had shifted. The air felt lighter somehow, easier to breathe. The silence that used to press against me now felt like peace. I made myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the folder of signed documents beside me. On the other side of the table sat the box from my father, the letters I'd been reading slowly over the past few days, savoring each one like a conversation I'd waited my whole life to have. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. I received notice about the mortgage transfer. I hope you're satisfied with what you've done. When you're ready to apologize, you know where to find me. I read it once, then deleted it. No anger, no sadness, just a quiet acknowledgement that she would never understand. She would never see her own role in what had happened, never accept responsibility for the choices she'd made. And that was okay. Her understanding wasn't required for my freedom. Another buzz, this time from Lily. Bradley resigned before they could fire him. Tori's been crying for days. Mom's pretending everything's fine, but no one's buying it. How are you? I typed back. I'm good. Really good, actually. I'm glad. You deserve it. I set the phone aside and looked around my apartment, really looked at it for the first time in weeks. The small kitchen where I'd eaten so many solitary meals. The window where I'd watched the snow fall on Christmas Eve. The bookshelf where my father's photo now stood next to a small stack of his letters I'd already read twice. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A knock at the door. I opened it to find Dot, holding yet another plate of cookies. You have to stop feeding me, I said, but I was smiling. I'll stop when you stop looking like you need it. She handed me the plate, but didn't come in this time. Just stood in the doorway, studying my face. You look different today. Good different or bad different? Good, lighter. She nodded, satisfied, like someone who finally put down something heavy. After she left, I stood in my kitchen holding the cookies and feeling for the first time in years like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That evening, I wrote a letter. Not to my mother. There was nothing left to say to her. Not to Tori or Bradley or any of the people who'd spent years treating me like I was invisible. Instead, I wrote to my father. The father I'd never known, who'd loved me from a distance I hadn't even known existed. Dear Dad, I wrote, I got your letters, all of them. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry I never knew you were trying to reach me. I'm sorry we never got the chance to have the relationship we both wanted. But I want you to know, I understand now. I understand why I am the way I am, steady, careful, never giving up even when it would be easier. I got that from you. I got the best parts of myself from you, and I didn't even know it. Thank you for never stopping. Thank you for keeping hope alive. Thank you for loving me even when you thought I didn't love you back. I wish I could tell you this in person. I wish I could hear your voice, see your face, make up for all the years we lost. But since I can't, I'll do the next best thing. I'll live the kind of life you wanted for me. One where I know my own worth. One where I don't let anyone convince me I'm less than I am. One where I choose the people who deserve my love instead of begging for scraps from people who never will. I'm free now, Dad. For the first time in my life, I'm free, and I have you to thank for that, for showing me what it looks like to love someone without conditions, without limits, without ever giving up. Your daughter, Miranda. I folded the letter and placed it in the box with his letters to me. It would never be sent, never be read, but somehow I knew he would understand. Outside my window, the January night had settled in, cold and clear, stars visible above the city lights. I stood at the glass and watched my breath fog the surface, then fade. Behind me, the apartment was warm. The cookies Dot had brought sat on the counter. The box of my father's letters waited on the table. My laptop held a folder of evidence I no longer needed to keep building. I thought about the family in Charlotte, the mother who'd stolen my father from me, the sister who'd laughed at my expense, the cousins who'd voted me out of their lives. I thought about the house I'd paid for, now dark and cold, waiting for someone else to keep it lit. And then I thought about the family I was building instead. Lily, who'd risked everything to give me the truth. Dot, who showed up with cookies when the lights were off. My father, who'd loved me across decades of silence. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was more than enough. I turned from the window and walked to the kitchen, made myself tea, sat down at the table with one of my father's letters and began to read. The apartment was quiet. The night was still. And for the first time in 37 years, I was home. The sun was warm on my face as I sat on a bench in a park I'd never visited before, a small green space in a town in Virginia, not far from where my father had lived. I'd come to see his grave. The headstone was simple: Thomas Allen Cole, 1955 to 2019, beloved teacher, devoted father. Someone had left flowers recently, the executor maybe, or a former student who still remembered. I added my own flowers to the collection and sat for a while, not speaking, just being present. "I'm doing okay," I finally said, feeling only slightly foolish for talking to a stone. "Better than okay, actually. I quit my job last month, took a position at a smaller firm, less money but better hours. I've been reading your journal, learning about who you were. I wish I'd known you. I think we would have understood each other." A breeze rustled the leaves above me. I closed my eyes and let it wash over my face. "I'm not angry anymore," I continued. "At her, I mean. I was for a while. But now I just feel sorry for her. She spent her whole life controlling everyone around her, and in the end, she's alone. No one trusts her. No one wants to be around her. The house is a mess. Tori told Lily she can barely afford the payments now that I'm not covering them. They might have to sell." I opened my eyes and looked at the headstone. "I think you'd be proud of me, Dad. I think you'd understand why I did what I did. And I hope, you'd be glad to know that I finally found my way to you." I sat a while longer, watching the shadows lengthen across the grass. Then I stood, touched the top of the headstone gently, and walked back to my car. The drive home took 4 hours. I played my father's favorite music, a playlist I'd reconstructed from mentions in his journal, and watched the landscape change from Virginia hills to North Carolina pines. When I finally pulled into my parking spot in Durham, the sun was setting. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. On my kitchen table, a small package waited, something I'd ordered weeks ago and nearly forgotten about. I opened it carefully. Inside was a frame I'd chosen online, simple and elegant. I picked up the photo I'd been saving, my father and me, taken when I was 7 years old, the last picture we'd had together before he was pushed out of my life. I slid it into the frame and set it on my bookshelf next to his journal. Then I stood back and looked at my apartment, at the photos on the shelves, the letters in the box, the small signs of a life I was building for myself. It wasn't the life I'd expected. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine, built on truth instead of lies, chosen instead of inherited. And that, I realized, was more than enough.